Hello everyone. This is the webinar series, our fourth in the series of therapeutic lifestyle changes. And this is on restful sleep and restful alertness. So the presenters today, my name is Ashish Mathur. I am the co-founder and executive director of the South Asian Heart Center. Just one second. And I'll be your moderator today, and Dr. Molina will be the main presenter. We encourage you to ask questions. Use the webinar chat line or raise your hand and let us know that you have a question. If you have any technical issues, please send us an email at admin@southasianheartcenter.org. We are going to have perhaps a couple of polls during the webinar. They'll be limited to 2 or 3. Be quick to answer so the pop-up that comes on your screen you can get rid of. And then the presentation handout will be available on our website, should be there by the end of the week. I'll try to get it in earlier and notify you appropriately. So the South Asian Heart Center is involved with addressing the CAD epidemic in Indians and South Asians, particularly because heart disease is severe and malignant in this population. 2 to 4 times the incidence of heart disease, 50% of the heart attacks occurring before the age of 55. And 17% of the global population bears 60% of the heart disease burden. And the question always comes up, why are South Asians at a higher risk? We know that the traditional risk factors for heart disease, which include diabetes and abnormal cholesterol ratios, occur in this population at a younger age. We also know that some of the protective behavioral factors are missing around the lifestyle, especially on physical activity and eating fruits and vegetables. And finally, genetics. There are genetic predisposition and inflammatory markers that are not typically tested for when you go for your checkups that are also part of the risk. So the South Asian Heart Center helps you prevent heart disease and diabetes, and we have developed the AIM methodology to assess, intervene, and manage to help you prevent that risk. The South Asian Heart Center's mission is to reduce the high incidence of heart disease in South Asians through a comprehensive, culturally appropriate program that raises awareness through education, evaluates risk with advanced screening, and facilitates lifestyle changes with heart health coaching. And we are located at Alameda Hospital in Mountain View, California. Our program is essentially a collaboration between you as a participant, the South Asian Heart Center as your screening and lifestyle coach, and your primary care provider for all routine care and medical management. Our TLC program, the Therapeutic Lifestyle Program, essentially covers the 3 lifestyle pillars, which is around diet, rest, and exercise. On diet, our basic mantra is clean over grains. On rest, which is the topic today, and we'll go into detail around that, is on restful sleep and restful alertness, both being important. And on exercise, to have a regular, varied, and finally vigorous physical activity. You may need medications depending on your risk, and that you need to confirm with your physician and medically manage that through your primary care physician. I'd like to introduce Dr. César Molina. His background in medicine is that he's a graduate from Yale Medical School. He did his MD thesis at Harvard, and his cardiology fellowship at Stanford School of Medicine. He is the medical director of the South Asian Heart Center, and he's also the chair of My Life Check of American Heart Association of Silicon Valley. Dr. Molina has a private practice that he runs at Alameda Hospital, with his basic philosophy being no frequent flyers to the cath lab, and focus on Ayurveda and Transcendental Meditation. We are really happy to have Dr. Molina as the Clinical Director of the South Asian Heart Center. And please welcome Dr. Molina.
Thank you, Cheech. So today we're going to be talking about restful sleep and restful alertness. These are our objectives. First, we're going to review the importance of a daily regular routine in successful aging. I like to define successful aging as the capacity and ability to remain alive, but more importantly, to be self-sufficient and autonomous as we age, that is, on your 2 feet, not with a walker and a wheelchair, living at home, caring for yourself. We'll discuss the physiology of sleep and the importance of sleep in maintaining a good health and longevity, and we'll also discuss the physiology of restful alertness. We'll define stress and we'll define stress psychologically and physiologically. We'll talk about stress reduction and the physiology of stress reduction and clinical consequences. So this is the basis of our TLC curriculum at the South Asian Heart Center. And the basis is the Alameda study. The Alameda study was a 7,000-person study. The 7,000 individuals were followed for 25 years, and 7 habits were identified as predictive of longevity and successful aging. Those 7 habits were adequate sleep, which is the topic of this noon lecture, that is 7 to 8 hours per night, and we'll talk later and show you the science behind the sweet spot of 7 to 8 hours per night. We'll talk regular vigorous activity is one of the Alameda 7, maintaining a recommended weight, no smoking, none or moderate alcohol consumption, eating breakfast daily, and eating meals regularly and no snacking. So today's talk is actually the talk of rest. So we are going to now embark on the description of the physiology of resting while asleep. What happens when we're sleeping? First, let's define sleep. Sleep is a natural recurring state characterized by reduced or absent consciousness, relatively suspended sensory activity, and inactivity of most voluntary muscles. There is actually a decreased ability to react to stimuli as a result of our suspended sensory activity. Sleep is, however, a heightened anabolic state, accentuating the growth and rejuvenation of the immune, nervous, skeletal, and muscular system. We grow during sleep. And sleep is observed in all mammals, all birds, and many reptiles, amphibians, and fish. So this is actually a universal, global process by which all living organisms, for the most part, at least higher levels organisms such as mammal, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish have to go through in the process of rejuvenation. Now, there are certain sleep, there are different sleep requirements, and those are sort of spread out through our age. This is a timeline of sleep requirements. This is a very busy slide, but you can see that the newborn requires 12 to 18 hours of sleep per day, while an adult requires between 7 to 9 hours per day. A pregnant woman can require more than 8 hours. So it just changes. Things change. One of the sad things is now that the school-age children and adolescents are not getting adequate sleep, and an adolescent requires between 8.5 to 9 hours of sleep per night. And we're seeing that because of the homework, the availability of nighttime entertainment, just on a computer or on a TV screen, most adolescents are not getting the required sleep. Now, this is actually a chart demonstrating sleep duration time trends in U.S. adults. In 1910, the average American slept 9 hours. By 1975, prior to the development of the internet, the average adult slept 7.5 hours. In 2005, the average American adult is only sleeping 6.8 hours per night. And there are some health consequences to that. So let's just go over the different stages of sleep. You know, we know that there are 5 stages to sleep. You have all experienced this. And the first stage is when your wife sort of knocks you because you're snoring, and you go back and you tell your wife, I am not sleeping. And you have this sort of feeling that you're still awake, but in fact you're sleeping. And this is sort of the transition between wakefulness and sleep. It lasts between 1 to 5 minutes, and it actually takes about 2 to 5% of the sleep cycle. And there are some characteristic EEG waves known as theta waves, some periodic alpha waves, which describe that wakefulness while you're sort of falling asleep. Please note that most people will fall asleep within 1 to 5 minutes, and people who have severe insomnia will have an extension of this transition period that seems to be very uncomfortable, for which many pharmaceuticals and other technologies have been developed. Stage 2 lasts about 20 minutes, and here the heart rate starts slowing down, the body temperature decreases, and there are sort of rapid bursts of rhythmic brain activity during the second stage. The third stage, you have this transition between light sleep and deep sleep, and you get these delta waves that are representative of very deep sleep. The brain really likes these delta waves, and when you're sleep deprived, the brain goes right back into those delta waves, getting very, very deep sleep. And it lasts, this delta wave, stage 4, lasts about 30 minutes, and there's sort of slow delta waves, and that's the most profound rest. And then we get to the very common dreaming state, number 5, in which you have this rapid eye movement, your muscles become perfectly paralyzed. It takes about 20 to 35% of your sleep period, and this is where you're flying through the sky, and you're doing all kinds of fantastic things and sort of fulfilling your desires during this sort of rapid eye movement sleep, which is sort of characterized by dreaming. In this setting, the muscles are paralyzed and relaxed, while the brain and other systems are very active. Your respiratory system, your heart rate go up, your metabolic rate may go up during this sort of dreaming state. So this is a sequence of sleep stages. You start with one, and then you move through them, but then you can go from one to the other. In the red, you see the REM sleep. At the beginning, there's not much REM sleep, but then at the end of the sleep cycle, there is much more REM sleep. This is when you wake up your companion and they say, hey, you interrupted me from my dream, and you actually, as a couple, you start on a bad footing that day. Now, there's some consequences of inadequate sleep, and this is really important because there are some significant neurobehavioral deficits associated with inadequate sleep, as well as cardiometabolic consequences, for which we're going to sort of discuss during our talk today. But there are two main causes of inadequate sleep. There's insufficient sleep, such as staying up all night, watching television, doing your email, and surfing the internet. Or there is also fragmented sleep, being awakened by your bladder, being awakened by snoring and sleep apnea, being awakened by a pager if you're a physician, and this can then lead to fragmented sleep. This insufficient sleep or fragmented sleep leads to excessive daytime sleepiness, and that's associated with neurobehavioral deficits, which are associated with increased errors, and there's a performance deficit, decreased accuracy, and then also cardiometabolic consequences with abnormalities in appetite regulation, abnormalities in the blood pressure, and abnormalities in temperature regulation, and the consequences that we'll be discussing. So all this inadequate sleep then is associated with increased morbidity and mortality, and definitely a decreased quality of life. There's nothing worse than walking through life being chronically tired. Now, what's the data? What is the data about what happens to our society during those periods of sleep deprivation? Well, the experiment is easy to do. Our Commerce Department changes the time in which we live in twice a year. In the spring, the typical, we lose 1 hour of sleep. So therefore, the typical American, the average American sleeps 1 hour less. So what happens on the Monday after that happens as compared to the Monday before? And you can see here in this orange column that the number of auto accidents increases significantly that Monday after that time change. And it goes the other way. When we have an extra hour sleep, we see then a drop in motor accidents, demonstrating that sleep deprivation is associated with increased errors, decreased accuracy, and increased accidents. Now, this sleep deprivation is also associated with cardiometabolic risk factors. A very common cause of sleep deprivation is sleep apnea. And we know sleep apnea is associated with increased blood pressure, increased heart disease, increased obesity, and increased diabetes. And I'll show you some of that data. Now, this is what is happening in America. We said that sleep time was dropping from 1910 all the way down to 2005, and associated with this decrease in sleep duration, there has been an increase in the average BMI of the American from 23 BMI, which is normal, not to in 1975 to 25, now to 26.9, demonstrating increased obesity that goes along with decreased sleep duration. Now, what is the mechanism through which sleep deprivation is sort of associated with obesity? But before that, we have a question from the audience.
Why is it
that I feel more awake during the day when I get less sleep per night than days when I get more sleep?
I have no answer to that, but the question is, at what time do you wake up? Most individuals will notice some added energy when they wake up with the sun. Sleeping in in the morning is associated with waking up tired and fatigued. It has to do something with your circadian cycle. So it's not only important to go to bed around 9 or 10 o'clock, but it's also equally important to wake up with the sun. Waking up after sunrise, waking up, getting out of bed around 9, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning is associated with increased daytime fatigue and sleepiness. And the answer to that is actually not found in medical science. I don't believe the studies have been done, but it's actually found in Ayurveda. Do you have any other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Molina.
Thank you, Dr. Molina. Not right now.
So now we're talking a little bit about the mechanisms of sleep deprivation that lead to obesity. Well, sleep deprivation is associated with increased fatigue. Increased fatigue is associated with reduced activity, which leads to reduced energy expenditure. Sleep deprivation is associated with altered thermoregulation. Your temperature goes down, and that leads to reduced energy expenditure. So when you have decreased energy expenditure, when you burn less of what you eat, that is associated with weight gain. Sleep deprivation is associated with longer opportunities to eat. So instead of being awake for 12 hours, now you're awake for 18, 19 hours. So there is a greater opportunity to eat. That increased opportunity to eat is associated with increased caloric intake. Also, sleep deprivation is associated with increased hunger. And in fact, individuals who are sleep deprived tend to make worse nutritional selections. They tend to select fat, sweet, salty foods that increase hunger mediated by decreased leptin and levels, and therefore you have a situation which is a perfect storm. You have both increased caloric intake and you have reduced energy expenditure, and the consequences are that of obesity. Sleep duration is associated with diabetes. Individuals who sleep more than 8 hours per night have a 3-fold increased risk of diabetes. Individuals who sleep less than 5 hours per night have also an increased risk of diabetes, a 2-fold increased risk of diabetes. So as you can see, from the Alameda study, that it was noted that the sweet spot was between 7 to 8 hours. Below that sweet spot, the risk of diabetes goes up. Above that sweet spot, the risk for diabetes goes up threefold. This is also confirmed in the nurses' health study, again demonstrating the issue of sort of increased sleep, sleeping more than 8 hours, associated in this study with an increased risk for diabetes. How about coronary heart disease? Coronary heart disease or coronary ischemic disease increases particularly in women who sleep less than 5 hours per night. That relationship appears not to be found in men, but both in men and in women, sleeping less than 6 hours per night is associated with an increased risk of hypertension. Unfortunately, I don't have the slide showing here, but the take-home message is that for both men and women who sleep less than 6 hours per night, there's an increased risk of hypertension. And that increased risk of hypertension tends to be accentuated more in women because in particularly women sleeping less than 5 hours per night is also associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease. So in summary, resting while asleep is associated with changes and predictions in all-cause mortality. That is particularly when you change, when you have a regular routine and all of a sudden you go from sleeping 7 to 8 hours per night and that goes up or it goes down, that tends to be suggestive that there is a metabolic or cardiovascular problem looming. A decrease in sleep duration affects all-cause mortality usually by cardiovascular death, while an increase in sleep duration affects overall mortality via an increase of non-cardiovascular deaths such as diabetes as well as cancer. Now this takes us to our next topic, and that is resting while awake. The South Asian Heart Center recognizes that stress is a significant risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and my job this afternoon is to sort of go over some of that data with you. And as a result, we have done a scientific investigation, and we have looked into yoga and meditation, and we hope to share that information with you this afternoon. So we have identified a hypo-metabolic state of functioning associated with non-focused alertness or pure consciousness. And this is achieved through a process or technology we call meditation. This word meditation in this context does not refer to sleep, does not refer to dreaming, does not refer to praying, does not refer to contemplation or concentration, and hopefully I will define that a little further for you. Another way of looking at this is a nice way of sort of taking a vacation during your day. When you're feeling stress, rush, or pressure, it's nice to take a little break twice a day and take this sort of a mini vacation in which you completely get refreshed, and I'll show you some of that data. So let's talk about different meditation techniques. We have known about concentration. In concentration, we focus on an object. That focus could be a reading. It could be a candle. It could be an image. It can be something, either a physical image we pay attention to or a mental image. There is focusing our attention, and usually concentrative technologies include spiritual exercises such as prayer, rhythmic breathing, repetitive chanting. There are also contemplative techniques where we just observe an object. We call this open monitoring, and this is common in mindfulness, Zen, pranayama, and other movement kind of meditative techniques such as Tai Chi. Then we also have transcendental techniques. These transcendental techniques is the purpose of the meditation is to lose the object of attention, so as to have the subject without an object, to have pure consciousness, So rather than being conscious of an object, just like in concentration and contemplation, in the process of this transcendental meditation is to have sort of automatic self-transcending, where the object of attention disappears and the subject is left by himself or herself and in a state of pure alertness, pure consciousness, or, as defined by science, restful alertness. This technology uses a meaningless sound, and this meaningless sound is also known as a mantra. Mantra means, in this case, a sound which effects are known. In many religions and philosophical paths, mantras tend to have meaning. In the setting and in the context of this technology that we're discussing this afternoon, this word, sound, or mantra, by definition and by the mechanisms of its use, has to be a completely meaningless sound. This slide shows, in summary, what is happening on the EEG side as well as in the psychology side when we sort of talked about these different three techniques. In focused attention or concentration, we have gamma waves. In open monitoring or mindfulness, we have theta waves, and we have less cognitive control versus highest cognitive control during focused attention. And during automatic self-transcending, we tend to have alpha waves, and there's the lowest cognitive control. We just take it as it comes. This is a slide showing the first study that was, scientific study that was published in the American Journal of Physiology, describing the state of wakeful hypo-metabolic physiologic state associated with a drop in oxygen consumption here in the black, and as well as a drop in carbon dioxide production, keeping the respiratory quotient the same. That is, the subjects are not consciously or voluntarily holding their breath. What happens is that their metabolic rate drops, and as a result, there is less oxygen consumption and less carbon dioxide production. This slide shows a comparison between restful alertness, the metabolic rate of restful alertness, hypnosis, and sleep. In the black, you can see that during the different stages of sleep, there is a slow drop in metabolic rate of about 8%. In hypnosis, in fact, there is actually an increase in metabolic rate. While during the practice of transcendental meditation or restful alertness, within a 20-minute period, there can be a significant 16% drop in oxygen consumption. So how does it work? That is actually will be discussed after answering this next question.
So Dr.
Molina, why is it important to have lower oxygen consumption?
Well, the oxygen consumption in this setting is used to measure the metabolic rate. And the metabolic rate is a measurement of rest. That is, when we drive our car, we look at the RPMs, the revolutions per minute of the engine. When we're talking about human action, activity, or physiology, when we are trying to find out or define the RPMs of our human physiology, we use metabolic rate, and we assess metabolic rate by measuring our oxygen consumption, which describes a rate of oxygenation and metabolic activities in our physiology.
So it's a good thing to kind of...
So it's a good thing.
In this setting, what it means is that we're getting very deep rest. Our physiology is slowing down and getting a very deep rest. So this is how it works. We talked about a mantra or sound, meaningless sound. We are conscious of things. In the wakeful state, we are just conscious of X, Y, or Z. So we have an object, in this setting a sound. We have the subject, which we call consciousness, and we have a process of being aware of the object. So in this sort of automatic self-transcending, the mind is taught to use a meaningless sound. This meaningless sound, by its own quality, tends to become more refined. This refined experience of the sound tends to be a pleasurable experience. And as the mind just sort of follows the pleasure principle, there comes a moment where the sound just disappears. It's automatically transcended. That's the purpose of the technique, is sort of to lose the object, which is contrary to the process of concentration, where you're trying to hold on to the object, or contemplation, where you're trying to observe the object. Here, there is no trying. It's just experiencing a sound that will sort of go away, and then you're purely left with just pure consciousness. So this is not a trance. It's just the removal of the object, and then you see just pure consciousness. It's just like taking off the movie from the screen, and you just see the white screen behind the color and the movement that you see in a movie. Now, that is associated with changes in respiratory rate. Here, the little marks mean respiration. This is the subject is awake. Then the subject is instructed to start the practice of meditation. And you can see that there are periods where there is no respiration, followed by a marker stating, I have actually come out and I've just experienced this state of pure consciousness. I'm now having thoughts again. I'm now breathing again. And there you go, on and off. And you can notice here that there is no compensatory over breathing. There's just no breathing, some slight breathing, and no breathing. This is what happens during this hypo-metabolic state of restful alertness associated with decreased oxygen consumption and deep rest. Now, there are many benefits to this. You can assume, well, gee, if you're getting extra rest during the day, could that interfere with your sleep at night? And that's not the case. On the first slides, I show you that it takes about 1 to 5 minutes to fall asleep. So there are some people that unfortunately suffer from insomnia, and that can be up to 70 to 90 minutes. And in this slide, you can see the change in time to sleep onset between the 30 days prior to learning and the 30 days after learning Transcendental Meditation. It's relief from insomnia. You can see that the subjects, after 30 days, had a significant drop in the time that it required for them to fall asleep, following the practice of meditation or Transcendental Meditation. Next question.
So this is an interesting question. So the low metabolic rate is good for getting better rest. But on the other hand, we try to increase the metabolic rate to burn more calories to lose weight. So aren't these two kind of conflicting?
No, they're not. You actually, when you want to get the arrow to the target, the first thing is you pull the arrow back. And the amount of energy that is used to pull the arrow back is what determines the energy to which that arrow is going to go out to the target. So what you're doing here, and this is really important, that's why we think that restful sleep and restful alertness are so important. And that is our energy, or power, or ability to concentrate and to get things done, to be able to understand the reality around us, and to be able to act on that reality is dependent on our wakefulness. Consciousness is the basis of activity. So if we have improved consciousness, improved restfulness, improve our wakefulness, then we will be better. And we will be more powerful and more energetic as we go about doing our daily routine. But that is actually a good question. The practice of meditation in this slide and these other panels show that gets the brain to require less compensatory dreaming after a period of 40 hours of sleep deprivation. Again, demonstrating that Transcendental Meditation has an additive and beneficial effect on restfulness that goes beyond the benefits of sort of sleeping. Let's talk a little bit about anatomy. And we have heard about the stress response. That is known as the flight, fright, fight response. And during that process, the frontal cortex, which is actually the CEO of our brain, is disengaged from the rest of the brain. Here you can see that the sort of executive functioning is disengaged during stress, and the flight or flight response is engaged in the limbic area. Humanity evolved the frontal cortex when it realized that it could not outrun the tiger. So it then realized nature provided humanity with the capacity to outsmart the target. And today, humans are on top of the animal chain as a result of the development of this frontal cortex. Unfortunately, during stress, many individuals lose the functioning of this frontal cortex. I will show you data demonstrating that during this practice of restful alertness, what happens is that the flight or flight response becomes disengaged, and this executive functioning area gets engaged and connected to the rest of the brain. So this is actually an imaging technique using a PET scan, looking at glucose metabolism in the brain. Here we have the frontal cortex, and in the red we see some metabolic activity. During the practice of Transcendental Meditation, you can see that there is an improved, an increase in metabolic activity versus eyes closed rest and Transcendental Meditation. The same is true for the parietal cortex, where there's increased activity here as compared to here. All stimuli up to the brain, up to the cortex, goes through the thalamus, which is sort of identified here as bright red. As the experience of the object is diminished, you can see that there is diminished thalamic activity in this two segments of the slide. Now, this is a study done in San Francisco in school children, not a scientific study. It's just sort of a demonstration in the classroom where electrodes were placed in the frontal and occipital lobes of the subject, and their EEG was evaluated during eyes open. You can see that there is sort of some asymmetry of functioning between the frontal, the prefrontal cortex here, and then in these two lines, the occipital lobe. This is actually the visual cortex right here. This is the frontal cortex. During eyes closed, you can see increased synchrony and slowing down in the occipital visual cortex, and then during the practice of Transcendental Meditation, you can see that both the frontal cortex and the occipital cortex are synchronized, demonstrating improved synchronization between the CEO of the brain and increased connectivity between the CEO of the brain and the rest of the brain. Let's talk a little bit about stress. And you can see time demands, loss of work, need for stimulation. Over here, unfortunately, the increased use of tobacco and the phone ringing. I think that we should also add a donut to the equation, because individuals who are under stress tend to do poor nutritional decisions. But first, let's define stress. Stress results from the inability of the physiology to maintain balance, a steady state, and or homeostasis. When the physiology is unable to maintain a steady state or balance, then the physiology is not at ease, and we call that disease. Psychologically, stress results from the absence of creativity when the individual or organization is challenged. So if you know the answer to the problem, there's no stress. When you have figured the answer to the problem, there's no stress. But if you lack the education, creativity, or intelligence then stress, psychological stress accumulates. So how does stress affect us? Well, it affects us by cutting off the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is involved in planning, judgment, moral reasoning, working memory, decision-making, and the self. Such that the person who coined the term stress, Dr. Hans Selye from Canada, defines stress as that which obstructs the flow of intelligence. So let's take a look at it functionally. This is actually another PET scan, looking at the frontal cortex of a normal brain where you have homogeneous uptake of sugar and as well as the occipital area. On the other panel, you can see the brain of someone who is commonly regularly using alcohol and drugs. These are not anatomic holes. These are functional holes in the frontal cortex, demonstrating that that individual lives under a continuous state of stress where the frontal cortex is disengaged from the rest of the brain. That's associated with decreased empathy and is associated with decreased compassion and this decreased capacity to maintain steadiness in the ever-changing phenomenology of existence. Now let's talk about job strain, and this is actually has been investigated and studied. Job strain is defined as a combination of high psychological demand, i.e. I need this by tomorrow, with low degree of control in the work situation, that is, and you have to do it as I say so. And that is associated with a 2 to 3 increased risk of coronary heart disease over a 14-year period. This comes out of work out of Europe, particularly the United Kingdom. This is a very busy slide. It's just added here as a reference to you so that you can actually go online and look at the PDF of this talk. But stress has been sort of controversial. Many physicians do not believe that stress has anything to do with heart disease. But here, I have shown you the data, fully referenced, about the effect of stress on the development of obesity, metabolic syndrome, abnormal cholesterol, cardiomyopathy, heart attacks, and longevity. Let's just give you some examples. Let's go over emotional triggers of myocardial infarction or heart attack. National experiment was the first Gulf War, where, remember, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. During that time, he was also bombing Tel Aviv, and during that period of bombing, there was an increased risk of acute heart attacks and sudden death. That increased by 58%. I recall Prime Minister Netanyahu going on TV with a gas mask, and I'm sure that did not help, leading to increased fear in the population and increased risk of acute heart attack and sudden death. Sporting events can also be bad for your health. And in Europe, where sometimes important soccer games are settled with penalty shots, the relative risk of death from a heart attack or stroke in men increases 51% a few hours, and during the game when the game is being settled with penalty shots. Earthquakes, particularly when they occur on a Monday morning, as the Northridge earthquake in LA in 1994. You can see that there was an increase from acute heart attacks from 149 the week before to 201 the week after the earthquake, and cardiac death from 5 per day to 24 the day of the earthquake. This hypo-metabolic state of restful alertness, in summary, is associated with reducing insomnia, as I showed you. There is multiple studies showing decreased tobacco use, anxiety, and alcohol consumption in subjects with PTSD. There's decreased systolic and diastolic blood pressure. In fact, Transcendental Meditation consistently in all studies has been shown to lower the systolic blood pressure. There is reduced angina and increased exercise capacity coming out of a study done at the VA hospital in LA. There's decreased insulin resistance, particularly in pre-diabetics. There's a reduction in total cholesterol, as shown in a paper from the Israeli Medical Society, and decrease in triglycerides as well as increase in HDL cholesterol in pre-diabetic individuals. There is decreased carotid arteriosclerosis as measured by the IMT. Most recently, and I'll show you a slide of that, there's a 43 to 47% reduction in acute death and stroke in patients who are fully treated and maximally treated with coronary artery disease versus a control group that was equally treated but did not practice the technology of transcendental meditation. This slide shows here that there is an 87% reduction in the need for cardiovascular hospitalization in subjects that were practicing transcendental meditation. It's a 5,000 subject study looking at Blue Shield hospital claims. Transcendental meditation is associated with a younger biological age, and on average there are 20 years biologically younger than chronologically if you're a long-term meditator. There is decreased cardiovascular mortality as compared to controls, and also there is decreased all-cause mortality in this 8-year study following hypertensive subjects in Oakland. This is a slide demonstrating decreased clinical events in patients with coronary artery disease. Here in the green you see the practitioners of meditation versus in the red the individuals who were fully treated but were just receiving health education, and you can see that there is a 47% reduction in cardiovascular events. And finally, in subjects that are at increased risk of dying, individuals who are elderly in a long-term facility, in the blue, the transcendental meditation versus the control group that included a relaxation mindfulness technique here, as well as a progressive muscular relaxation technique here. You can see that the practitioners of transcendental meditation had a lower blood pressure, increased cognitive flexibility, and enhanced longevity. So in summary, our therapeutic lifestyle changes curriculum is the following. Very simple. There's a nutritional component, and here we actually ask you to eat 2 cups or 2 fists of cooked vegetables every day, 1.5 cups or 1 fist of fresh fruit per day, oily fish if you're not vegetarian, 2 times per week, and tuna is not an oily fish, 12 nuts daily, and to consume less than or no more than 2 alcoholic beverages per day. And obviously, it's important to avoid addictions and poisons such as tobacco, soda, and fast food. We recommend increased physical activity. 10,000 steps per day equals 3 miles per day of walking, 150 minutes of aerobic exercise per week. And finally, following this discussion, we recommend restful sleep, 7 to 8 hours of good restful sleep, and the practice of transcendental meditation, bringing about the state of restful alertness for stress reduction, increased cognitive capacity, cognitive intelligence, for 20 minutes twice a day. So I would like to sort of take some questions now. I'm going to leave this slide here as a way of prompting you to ask us some questions. We have some time in this webinar. Please go ahead, Ajit.
So just wanted to let everybody know that the webinar series concludes with this presentation. Right now we'll start again with the webinars sometime in August and get that rolling again. We will go back to the evening times first and then back to the lunchtime hours later so that we can do that and have 2 more rounds of this. If this has been useful to people, then just let others know as well. Our hope is that we can educate people and show the evidence behind the therapeutic lifestyle changes that can really change the direction of heart disease and diabetes in this population. I haven't seen any new questions, so, oh, here we go. So one question that has come up is, where can I find more information about practicing Transcendental Meditation? And I can take a crack at that. The South Asian Heart Center runs actually an orientation on Transcendental Meditation every Thursday, and that is at the Transcendental Meditation organization in Palo Alto. So it's at 7:30 p.m. on Thursday nights. You could just walk into that and get a good 1-hour orientation on Transcendental Meditation. The next question was, is there a recording for this webinar? We are recording this webinar, and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel, so that should be available by the end of the week. As a matter of fact, when we ran this webinar the last time around, we did tape it, and it's up on our website as well as on YouTube. So it was similar. We've made a few changes to the presentation, but in effect, this should already be up there. Here's a question for you, Dr. Molina. Is TM the most preferred form of meditation, or could concentrated meditation also be helpful?
Well, there are many technologies known as meditation, such as concentration and contemplation. They may, in fact, have some benefit, but the fact is that the research behind them is not there. The question is, well, you know, if I take an aspirin and it helps me with my fever, it helps me with my headache, and it also decreases a heart attack, is it okay if I take Vioxx, which also lowers my temperature, gets rid of my headache? And the answer is, well, Vioxx, even though it gets rid of your headache and it gets rid of your fever, in fact increases your risk of a heart attack. So we have to be a little careful, and we cannot transfer the findings of one technology and assume that is the case for other technologies, just like we cannot transfer the findings from one medication and assume that all medications that have similar qualities will have all qualities. So that's where it gets a little tricky. But there's not one, there's no such thing as one or the other. You can actually practice different technologies. There may be some great value to the concentrative technologies of concentration, such as in prayer, but I don't have any data, any science to be able to sort of talk about it this afternoon.
Next question to you, Dr. Molina. Is Vipassana a form of mindful meditation?
It is. It's actually it's an open monitoring technology.
And this is actually an interesting question as well. I'm sure a lot of people think about this. Are there still benefits to meditating for shorter periods of time? That is 20 minutes per day, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. Or is it absolutely necessary to kind of have the 20 minutes twice a day to receive any benefit?
That's a good question, because the studies that I have shown you here with the data on Transcendental Meditation, it is clear that the subjects are not all meditating regularly, and in fact the subjects are included as per intention. That is, if they were randomized into the Transcendental Meditation group, they are included in the analysis. And in that study in which I mentioned a 47% reduction in cardiovascular events, well, if they just looked at people who were regular, that is, they meditated twice a day, they had a 61% reduction versus the control. So it's like going to the gym. If you go to the gym frequently, you'll have an increased physiologic benefit. If you're a weekend warrior, there may be some benefit, but not as much as if you go on a regular basis.
And I believe the other thing, Dr. Molina, with that is that the meditation then transcends into your life when you are actually not meditating, if you're doing it on a regular basis, that you're able to make, better decisions.
What happens is during the practice, associated with a drop in metabolic rate, there is this increased connectivity between the different parts of the brain. That increased connectivity remains, and it takes more and more stress to turn off the frontal cortex and turn the frontal cortex off. So, in fact, that's what defines an excellent leader. An excellent leader is someone who can think, who can analyze during stress, while the poor follower is unable to sort of analyze a situation because stress paralyzes and eliminates that very important denominator of humanity, which is the prefrontal cortex.
So
one other question came up on the cost. Would cost be a barrier to the practice of TM? To my knowledge, it is expensive.
Well, cost is there. The car, a car costs money, a sofa costs money, food costs money, everything costs money. Going to school costs money. So it just depends on what it is important for you. Sometimes having a good diet may cost a little bit more money than going and having a burger at a fast food restaurant. But it's just a matter of priorities. The cost of learning transcendental meditation costs less than buying a high-definition television or a sofa.
And here's a question regarding the use of music. Is there a recommendation for some music to use in TM?
No. In the practice of transcendental meditation, what is happening is the sensory experience of an object is diminished and transcended. Music is sensory stimulation, and therefore that will be contradictory to the process of auto-transcending. There is great benefit to music. There's great joy to music. There may be some health benefits to music, but in this setting, there is no use of music. Just like having fresh fruits and vegetables are of great benefit, but the consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables while doing push-ups is not recommended.
All right, so if there are no further questions, just wanted to let you know that we'll begin again sometime in the end of August, and thank you for attending.